Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have a wonderful pleasure today of having Angela Minichi. She's the managing researcher in the education program at the American Institutes for Research, AIR, and she's the director of Education Policy Center at AIR, which provides rigorous research and evidence-based perspectives on education issues spanning pre-kindergarten to career. So we're very, very blessed to have her today, and would you please join me in welcoming her?
So, how many of you are familiar with the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders? A couple of you. Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar, I know I don't have internet access here, so I can't get on and show you, but we're a federally funded comprehensive center. That means we're free technical assistance to states, and we can actually work with states in their district cohorts too. And the reason I want to tell you that is because all the materials I'm going to use today are free. So if you go on our website and you want to use these materials for workshops in your region or in your district, you're welcome to take our materials and adapt them in any way that you want. In fact, we'll give you Word copies so you can put your own logos on them. What I was going to talk to you today is one of our professional learning modules. We have 8 different professional learning modules. So again, free materials, free resources. We'll even help you customize them. So if you call us up and say, hey, I'd like to do a training or I'd like to present this material, can you help me customize it for my context? We're happy to do that as well. So, what I had planned to talk about, but then I realized kind of from the limited description may not be what everybody is thinking that they'd like to hear. I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to tell you what I would like to share with you today, but then I also want to hear from you to see what are you most interested in as well. So, what I want to talk to you about today are the kinds of knowledge and skills that both evaluators and teachers will need in the next generation of evaluation systems. So, one of the things is that we know in teacher evaluation, one of the promises of teacher evaluation is that it'll actually help improve teacher practice. It'll help improve instructional quality at scale. But what we see right now around implementation is systems aren't being implemented with support. And so that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. However, I realize that you may have lots of things that you'd like to learn or talk about around teacher evaluation. So I'm going to ask you to take just a couple minutes, jot down what would make this session worthwhile for you. So what would you like to be able to talk about? And by the time you leave here, what would be helpful for you to kind of get out of this session? Because this is obviously a session for you, and so as much as I can, I'm going to try and customize it. So just take about 30 seconds, jot that down. I know you don't have tables, and so you have hopefully a folder that you can write on. So volunteers, what would you like to hear about? What's important to you around the topic of teacher evaluation? Yes? Okay, great. Yes?
Yeah, I was looking for how do we use evaluations as one spoke in the wheel of professional development of our effective teachers. Oftentimes evaluations are seen as punitive, but the overwhelming majority of our teachers are effective. So how do we use that as a collaborative conversation more than coaching approach to really good practice?
Yeah, excellent point. So many of our systems in education are deficit oriented, right? And that's how teacher evaluation has at least started out. Yes? Okay, the link to educator preparation. Great, yes.
Maximizing instructional leadership support what's the overlapping coaches and
Great, we'll try to have a conversation about that for sure. Yes. Okay. The step before. Okay. Anything else? Well, I think the good news is I'm going to hit on some of the topics that you've already brought up, and then remind me when I don't address what you just said you wanted to hear. So if I don't get to it, definitely talk to me about it. And again, keep in mind that this is your session, so I know, again, this isn't the best interactive session, but I'm hoping this will be more of a discussion. So at any time, if you want to stop, jump in, ask questions, I encourage you, as much as possible. So this professional learning module that I'm going to go through, some of the different snippets of it, it is intended to be a 6 to 8 hour professional learning module. So I'm only picking out some highlights so you can kind of see what some of the topics are. But if we were going to do this session together, these would be some of the things that we would be talking about. So again, we want to identify a high quality professional learning plan for evaluation and understand how that's really important to instructional improvement. And that's, I think, a little bit about what you were talking about. We want to recognize the critical role of assessing and monitoring evaluators' skills. So in your state, in your district, in your region, who are primarily your evaluators? Are they primarily school leaders? Do you have peers? Do you have outside evaluators? All? Site-based administrators? Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'd love to have a conversation with you about how that's going in your state, your district, your school, in terms of sustainability, in terms of roles and responsibilities, because I know from a national perspective, that's definitely one of the conversations we're having out there. Is this the right role for our site-based administrators? Should we be thinking about expanding those roles to teacher leaders as well? Then we want to talk about a comprehensive professional learning plan, explain what makes an evaluator professional learning process high quality and helps administrators develop strong skills in providing feedback. And I'll talk a little bit about feedback and coaching as well. And then identify professional learning approaches for evaluation in different contexts. And then consider next steps for communicating about your professional learning approach. So again, if we were going to do this 6 to 8 hours, these would be the objectives that we would go through. This is a sample agenda. Today, I'm going to focus on parts in the professional learning for evaluation. What are characteristics of high quality professional learning for evaluators? And professional learning for feedback and coaching. So those are the 3 kind of areas that I'm going to zoom in on as well. There's lots of good stuff in this professional learning module, things about observer bias, more stuff about how to assess master coding, how to help build the skills and knowledge of evaluators. I'm not going to be able to go through that, but again, all these materials are free on our website, so if that's something that you're really interested in, I really strongly urge you to take a look at the professional learning module. Okay, so we're going to start with the first activity. So you should have a handout. Now again, in an ideal situation, we'd all be sitting around tables, we could have a discussion about this. But I'd like you to take a couple of minutes and on your handout, go through these 3 different statements. So educators, and again, depending on actually I should probably stop and do this. So how many, just to understand who my audience is, how many people are from higher ed? Okay. How many people are teachers or administrators? Okay. County education staff? Okay. Am I missing California Department of Ed? Anyone? What else am I missing? Okay, California subject matter projects, technical assistance providers. Okay. Okay. So take these statements and craft them for whatever context it makes sense for you. So you can put in state, region, district, school, and go through and talk about how confident you are. So you have a scale in front of you of 0 to 10, 0 being not at all, 10 being very confident, and look at these 3 statements. So educators in California have a solid understanding of the state and district requirements and processes for evaluation. Educators have access to strong professional learning opportunities about the new evaluation system and can implement their role successfully within their districts. And evaluation data collected in the district systems are reliable, accurate, and useful for providing high quality feedback. So take a couple minutes to evaluate that statement based on your role, and then we'll share out a little bit. So let's talk about the first statement. So again, substituting in what's appropriate for you, either educators in your state, your district, your school, your region, if you're working with a cohort of districts, have a solid understanding of the state and district requirements and processes, whatever those might be that's relevant. So what did you talk about there? How confident did you feel? Yes?
Okay. So we really talked about how much our teachers and administrators really understand the standards for the profession, since that's the foundation for the evaluation system. How deep of a knowledge do our teachers get once they get out of their induction phase, and how do we sustain that learning?
You were on the confident side?
We were actually on the less confident side. I think my experience is most teachers really don't revisit those standards they're evaluated on very much at all. So.
Someone else?
I'll speak my truth. 6 years ago, through the collective bargaining process, the Faculty Association came to us and said, do you guys ever talk when you're doing evaluation systems? So they kind of called us out on it. They said, hey, let's make this system better. So we went on about a 2-year journey with our Faculty Association to create a new teacher evaluation system. And then we knew that once we had that adopted, there's this window of opportunity for implementation. And so we hired a consultant, and we've been on this 4-year journey to standardize, to do a more effective job of providing feedback. But the sad narrative is 4 years into this, I think when this is the first one, but I think we know what we need to do, but are we implementing it with fidelity, and then still what's the quality of feedback? So that's the dilemma. So you can do all the trainings and get everyone to understand what the expectation is, but then how are they still using it? What is the feedback being provided to teachers? And I think if I were to survey my faculty, I still unfortunately would not think that they would think it was the best feedback.
My experience in a lot of districts is that the evaluation is a once-a-year event that you escape. You make it through, and then you have 365 days away from that. So I think having an ongoing conversation is going to be a big piece of moving the craft of teaching forward.
Told everybody this will tell you how old I am. I'm doing my best Phil Donahue impression here.
Yeah, but you're in 3-inch heels. Phil did not ever have to run in 3-inch heels. We had a conversation as technical assistance providers on the gap that occurs in how we coach administrators, maybe out of the CAPSL or ISLIC standards. And then there are evaluation systems, maybe based on TPEs or maybe even kind of homegrown goals in districts. But there's a gap between how those two sets of standards aren't aligned in the support of the entire feedback cycle.
One more comment? You want to volunteer?
Okay, I think we have the same problem with evaluation as we do with teacher preparation. Our administrators who do most of it are so overworked that they don't have a time to do a good job and the time to discuss with each other and be trained on how to do the best job of feedback.
So let me ask, I'll try to do something here like ad hoc by a show of hands. So here's how I want to say this. Where are my evaluation skeptics? So how many of you think teacher evaluation is really a worthwhile endeavor? Okay. Okay, it can be. Anybody think that maybe, we should abandon teacher evaluation or willing to put your hand up? Okay. So I want to be really clear, and hopefully this will come through in a couple of messages. So the first is that teacher evaluation by itself is really insufficient, right? I would argue that it's one part of a professional learning system, right? I mean, it's the assessment piece. And I guess when I talk to people about it, I say, it's really hard to improve something when you don't measure it. So ideally, your teacher evaluation system should provide you with really high quality data about instructional quality. Just really difficult to improve instructional quality if we feel like we don't have accurate and reliable measures of instructional quality. But by itself, that's not sufficient, right? And so I heard somebody say something about, well, we only do it one time a year, or we don't provide, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about here, we don't provide the support for the people who are either doing the evaluations or receiving them. And so there's lots of things that have to happen in order for that to, for evaluation systems to live up to its promise. One thing we're not going to talk as much about here today, but that's really critical is well, then what is that link to professional learning? Do you have systems in place right now that use this evaluation data to link to professional learning opportunities? And that, from my perspective, working with states and districts across the country, that's the biggest challenge. So there's an information problem. People don't believe that the information is accurate. It doesn't tell you what it needs to tell you about teaching quality. They don't think it's reliable in the sense that in many places people worry that depending on who the evaluator is, or depending on who the teacher is, what subjects they teach, what grade level, that those evaluations can be different or produce different results, right? And then they also think that the information itself doesn't provide information that will help anybody grow in their practice. So you can think about the jobs that you all have in here today. What kind of information does somebody need to give you that would actually help you get better at the job that you do? And if you start to think about that for teaching, because teaching is such a complex and technical profession, you can now begin to see where some of those big gaps in implementation are. So I think we have a long way to go till these systems get to where they need to be, but it's hard to imagine a professional learning system without a measure of teaching quality. It's hard to imagine how we actually improve achievement gaps without a measure of instructional quality, right? So hopefully that'll come through at the end. Okay, I put my favorite phrase up here, more than training. I know educators hate the word training. As a former teacher, it's not my favorite word. But I think that's how a lot of people will see it. Districts across the country, they design a new evaluation system, they're ready to implement it, so they start their training program. Teachers come in, they might get a half a day of training. Evaluators may get a half a day of training or something like that. I want to argue in this session that we need to think about professional learning around the evaluation system as something ongoing, as something that's systematic, that's provided to all educators and doesn't just happen once a year. So it's again about shifting perspectives and integrating evaluation and professional learning. So we will talk about that. So one, and thinking about it in 3 phases. 1, preparing for evaluation. 2, the actual evaluation itself, and then using evaluation results. And I heard that a little bit from when we talked about at the beginning, like what did you want to hear in this particular session? So there are things that have to go on that have to happen before you even do your evaluation system, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. So people have to intimately understand what they're being evaluated on, and there's lots of reasons to do that as well. During the evaluation, you need to focus on building up knowledge and skills around things like collecting and analyzing data, reflecting, giving and receiving feedback. And I heard somebody talk about the importance of that as well. We really underestimate the kinds of knowledge and skills people need to give high quality feedback. And using evaluation results. So what do you do with the data once you have it? Let's say you actually create a system that yields accurate, reliable, and useful data. What do you then do with it? How does it get integrated into your district, to your school, to your region? I was talking earlier with somebody about the idea about coherence and alignment. So how does the evaluation system, how is it integrated into your other professional learning systems? How is it integrated into curriculum? I mean, again, in education, what we tend to do is layer things on rather than thinking about the kind of intimate connections. So we need to think about, rather than evaluation as a one-shot, one-time event, because that's a poor investment. We actually know when we go and do some of this training and people get it once a year, it does not build their knowledge and skills. And the thing in education is that we actually know a lot about how adults learn. But yet we continue, and I apologize for being doing this myself in this space, but we continue to provide information to people in a way that doesn't actually help them learn. And evaluation systems aren't any different. So just very quickly before we jump into the next activity, consider what would you gain by actually investing in preparing both your evaluators and those who are going to be evaluated around the knowledge and skills that they need to be successful in these systems. So the first is trust, right? And when I talk to educators all across the country, I hear this all the time. They do not trust that these systems are there to help them. I have yet today to meet an educator who, when I've said something like, would you like something that would help you do your job better and be successful with your kids? I've never heard a teacher say to me, no. So it's not that people don't want to be successful in their job. It's not that they don't want to help kids. They don't actually think that these systems do that. So the first is that actually by investing in building people's knowledge and skills to do this work, you can build trust. I also talk to people, and having worked at the AFT for a while, so I come from a union background, I always talk to my fellow teachers, and they'll say, well, we can't implement the system until we have trust. Well, it doesn't really work like that, right? I mean, people actually need to see these systems working, and so this is one way to build trust as you're doing it. Better data. We talked a little bit about fair, defensible, accurate, and useful. So the more that we prepare people and help support them in the evaluation system itself, it has a better chance of yielding better data. And better feedback and better outcomes. We'll get more into that as well. And supporting long-term continuous improvement. So if you think about, I think one of the other challenges that states and districts are facing right now is how do you create an evaluation system that can be dynamic and fluid? So a lot of places we create systems that are very fixed, but educators' needs change from year to year, students' needs change from year to year, and you want to create an evaluation system that can actually change and grow with you depending on what your needs are. So when you have new teachers coming in, how does your evaluation system reflect the kinds of supports that more new teachers are going to need? Or you have an influx in students who are English language learners. So I think that's also one thing to think about is how do we create those systems and what does that support look like? And so again, better leadership and instruction. So most important, educators' capacity to deliver high quality leadership and instruction is reinforced when educator preparation for evaluation is integrated within professional learning systems. That seems like a pretty common sense thing to say, a lot harder to do. And I would love to hear if there are stories in here about the work that you're doing, if you feel like you've gotten to a space where your evaluation system is part of your professional learning system in a meaningful way. So if you have that, definitely please share that. Okay. So again, the professional learning link, this is just to illustrate the relationship between improved adult learning and improved student learning, the different phases of building people's knowledge and skills around the evaluation system, what the learning effects are, and then what we hope the education outcomes are, right? Better leadership, improved student learning, better instruction. Okay, so let's stop there. So you should have a handout here, handout number 2. And let's take about 5 minutes to go through here. And this is kind of just a quick assessment based on your district, your school, your region, districts that you might work with as a technical assistant provider, districts that you might know from a state perspective. Go through and see how many of these characteristics would you say match your system. So as you're going through this, what are you finding? In terms of the kinds of things that you focus on, the knowledge and skills that you work with your evaluators and your teachers, are you checking off a lot of these? Are these things that you currently in your professional learning plan around evaluation systems do? Yes, no? Would like to? Okay. Okay.
I would imagine most of us are missing those video components.
Okay.
You know, one of the big issues, and this is, and I represent a small rural school. You know, those of you that are in larger districts, count your blessings. Because basically in small schools, you're relying on support from a county office that may or may not be able to provide some of the support services. But we just don't have the kinds of support staff that a lot of you have to do. And time for us is a killer. I mean, I have time for the pre-conference, the observation, and the post-conference. That's about it. I mean, that's pretty much all I really do for the small group of teachers that I have. And then when I started looking at the in-depth and the concrete, I'm going, holy smokes, you know, I don't even have time to think about what I'm going to do the next day sometimes. So some of those are a real struggle, and half of the schools, if not more than half the schools in California, fall within the framework that I operate under. And I think that's just another aspect of what we need to look at.
So I think that's such a great comment, and thank you for sharing that. I think, so I'll say 2 things to that. I think the capacity of different districts to do this kind of work is varied, right? And so I think what we really need are different strategies and solutions to help build the capacity of our smaller districts, our rural districts. And so I think we're not there yet. I'd like to be able to say that I think that there are places that I could point you to and say, although there are some innovations happening, like, so for example, some rural schools in Minnesota, one of the things they're trying to figure out how to do is to share evaluators across district lines. Because they have often, and this may resonate with you, you know, so the principal has to get evaluated, and you have one person who's supposed to do all of the evaluations for their entire school. So there are some innovative practices I think happening like that, but I definitely recognize that that's an area that we have to think about. The second thing I would say is while I'm talking about the professional learning around evaluation systems. I mean, if you think about what are evaluation systems supposed to do? I mean, evaluation systems are built on professional teaching standards. Professional teaching standards are supposed to be what teachers should know and be able to do. Hopefully, they're tied very closely to academic standards for students, what students should know and be able to do, right? So if you shift the perspective from training on your evaluation system to helping to build people's knowledge and skills about what they're supposed to be doing, which is teaching practice, I think it's an easier shift to make than to think about it. It's like, well, we just have to do our training around our evaluation system. What we really care about is are people competent in the teaching standards? And think about it from that perspective as well. And so then what does that mean? Teachers need to know how to teach to them. People need to know how to assess against them, right? And so hopefully, again, we can kind of talk about how to make that shift so it's not just about training your evaluators, but it's really about building that throughout your professional learning system in your school or district. So I'm going to just briefly go, I'm also, given that this is a 6 to 8 hour professional learning module, I'm trying to also gauge how quickly I can get through some of this. But I'm going to run through a little bit of this, and then we'll get into feedback and coaching. We do have videos that you can watch on this that talk about like what's a good feedback conference, and there's all kinds of activities. Because we don't have internet in here, I couldn't bring them in. But just to let you know, if that's something that you're interested in, that is also part of the module. Okay, so when we talk about the kind of professional learning opportunities that people need around the evaluation system, and again, I'm hoping we can kind of make this shift from thinking about it not just as evaluation, but professional learning in general. Comprehensive, in-depth, concrete, hands-on, assessing, continuous. And so what does that mean? Comprehensive means that we build people's knowledge and skills to observe educator practice. It's really important for a variety of reasons, but again, this idea that it's hard to improve instructional quality if we don't have a valid and reliable way to go into classrooms and look at what the quality of instruction is. This, I find, is one of the hardest parts of the evaluation system, but I'm also kind of I'm trying to be an optimistic educator. Like, you know, as a teacher, I feel very proud of my profession, so I don't want to walk away from saying it's just too darn hard to measure instructional quality. Like, I feel like in 2016, we ought to be able to do that by now, right? Non-observation evidence. All of us who have been educators at one time know that not everything happens in the classroom, and so there needs to be a way to take into account the stuff that happens outside the classroom. Things like facilitating observation conferences, coaching educators and providing feedback, and we'll talk more about that. Understanding and analyzing student growth data. Again, depending on your situation, your state or your district, it might not necessarily be value-added data, and I would hope that you're looking at different measures besides that, but making the connections between teaching and learning. How do you know the instructional practices that you're doing in your classroom are producing the kinds of student outcomes that you want? So that's a skill that I work with teachers on as well. Combining measures for summative scoring, whole nother conversation we can talk about. Guiding the creation of professional development plans. Managing time and technology to be efficient. So one thing to get back to the thing about summative scoring and thing, I think in the field of education where we are right now around teacher evaluation is if evaluation systems aren't living up to their promise, some of it's because we haven't prepared people very well to do these kinds of things. But let's be honest, some of them are design flaws. So I think at this point where we are in educator evaluation, we do need to take a step back and make sure that the system we designed is really going to get the results that we intend to do as well. So that's just a caveat to put in there. So in-depth includes the core knowledge and skills that evaluators need in sufficient detail. What are those core knowledge and skills? Well, first of all, they need knowledge of instructional or leadership framework and evaluation processes. We were talking about that earlier. Ability to collect and score evidence accurately and reliability, and ability to explain scoring, provide useful feedback, and coach educators. So I'm kind of on the fence about this one too. And again, I think I heard some of your comments about time for evaluators, whether it's administrators. I think the more and more I'm out in the field doing this work, I'll just let you know what my bias is. I just don't think, unless we're going to really restructure the role of administrators, that this is a role that they can be very successful in. The more administrators I talk to, they say, on top of everything else I have to do as a principal, I now have to do that. I think what happens is, when you do that, then you have these systems where people only get observed once a year. Now, again, if you think about what we actually know about how people learn, and you can rely on some of the research around expertise, right? People need continuous feedback. It can't just happen just once a year. People need to know where they need to grow. They need to have real specific feedback on how to get better, and then they need to practice it, and then they need somebody to observe them and to give them more feedback. I'm not so sure, and maybe I'm being a skeptic, so I'd love to hear if people have different ideas in here. I'm not so sure that's a role that principals can play very well. Having said that, I don't think it means that principals are not instructional leaders in their building, or they have no role in the evaluation system. I just wonder if the systems are sustainable and will actually live up to their promise unless we start to bring in more people that can play that role. So if you have diverging opinions on that, happy to hear it. Or thoughts?
Well, I just think we have to overcome the fear of including the peer and the expertise of the colleague in the system, maybe in a formative way to inform the summative, but there's a fear there.
Oh, I think no doubt. And there's also it's a kind of, I think evaluation has always been the role of the principal in many places, and so it's also kind of giving up that, or giving some ownership of that role to others as well, too. Yeah. But anyway, I think it's something to think about as we go forward. Again, can these systems live up to it if we don't have people that have the capacity to do it and that we can support in the ways that they need to be supported? Because I think these things here, when you talk about the kind of knowledge and skills people need to be able to do this work, this is actually really difficult work. And by the way, we assume teachers can give feedback without a lot of support too, and that's just not true. Teachers need a lot of support and training and how to give feedback as well. Okay, so concrete, I think this is pretty evident, but again, the kinds of things that you need, the training, and this is really built on what we know about how people learn. It has to be really concrete. It has to be in their daily work. And so when you think about the kinds of opportunities that people will need to build their skills around evaluation, you have to have concrete examples. I am not going to have an opportunity today to talk about master scoring, but in the professional learning module itself, there's a whole, and there's lots of videos where you can actually watch people go through a master scoring process. So if you have questions about that or you're interested about that, I'm happy to talk about that later. Yes? Yeah, and so there are some examples in this professional learning module, but I'd be happy to kind of reach out and at least let you know where some examples that you can pull from as well. So a couple of things about that. I do know that Charlotte Danielson is coming out with a new framework that's going to have videos attached to it as well, and those are going to be free, by the way. So there's going to be videos there. I mean, a lot of people use Teaching Channel, but you're absolutely right, building that video library, and that's what the master scoring process talks about, that if you're actually going to do this work well, you need to have a range of practice so people can see, like, what does it look like? Not only, like, let's say you have a 4 or 5 point scale. Not only does what does a 3 look like or a 4 like, but you actually need to see, like, what's the high end of a 3? What's the low end of a 3? I mean, it's really technical work when you start to think about it. It's assessment. And I think that's what people don't understand. Teacher evaluation is assessment work, and assessment's really complicated and technical. But that's actually a really good practice. That's really good because if you're going to give people this ties in very closely to the feedback. If you're going to give people feedback that's going to actually help them improve, you need to understand the differences between practice. What will you say when you take a look at their practice? What do they need to do specifically to improve? What are you actually looking for? So it's a really good, important point. And I would say your comment is one that I hear often, is again, having resources and access to those resources.
Do you know if there's any data that looks at the self-assessment that teachers would make using the evaluation tool and the evaluator?
So is there data that looks at teachers self-assessing their practice and the relationship between evaluators assessing their practice? Yeah, there's some research out there. I don't want to summarize it because I'm not sure I know it completely, but I would say at least some of it, what I'm remembering, is that teachers are actually pretty critical of their own practice. They tend to rate themselves lower than evaluators.
So
So that makes me think about when teachers video themselves, which some teachers do. They'll put their little iPhone or iPad up in the classroom, they'll videotape themselves, and they'll use that to evaluate themselves, so that self-evaluation piece. So it'd be interesting to have that conversation with a principal, right? Here, I videotaped myself, here are some things that I'm noticing about myself, so it's a little more informal, but it's still evidence that is helping teachers evaluate themselves, and then here's some things that I think I need to work on. What do you think?
So I do have slides in it, but I won't flip ahead to them. I'll talk about it. So there is a research study called Best Foot Forward. Has anybody heard of that? It's out of Harvard. And so what they allowed teachers to do, so there's a lot going on, I think, with videotaping and teachers videotaping themselves in the classroom, which I think is going to help move evaluation systems to the next generation. But what teachers were able to do is they were given a video, one of those swivel cameras, and then they were told to, as many videos as they wanted to take videos of themselves teaching. Then the teachers controlled which videos they uploaded to the evaluator. And so I think this is a really promising project, because one of the things that they found is that when teachers were able to take control of that process, they were actually much more thoughtful and selective about what they sent, and more reflective. So the first thing is, if you have, as a teacher, you have to review your own practice, you're going to go through it and look and start to think about what you're being assessed against, and you start to become more reflective about it. So there's the first thing. The second thing they found in there was that actually the conversations then between the evaluator and the teacher were more rich, because the teacher had spent more time looking at it. The evaluator spent more time looking at it, being prepared, because they knew the teacher was going to had already gone through that process of looking at it. So you found that teachers felt more confident about it. They were ready to have what would be more of a growth conversation. They were more reflective about their process, and they rated the quality of the conversations much higher than if somebody had just come into their classroom to observe their practice. I mean, you can imagine too, how many people have been evaluated in the classroom? So a lot of times that conversation, excuse me, a lot of times that post-feedback conversation doesn't happen right away. I don't know if I remember when I was in the classroom, I wasn't paying, things happen so quickly in the classroom that you don't pay attention to. So it's really hard to have a conversation where your evaluator is saying, remember when you did that, or that kid did that, and you're sitting there going, I don't know, I guess so, I think, kind of remember. It's very different when you can now sit down and watch yourself on the video, and you can say, oh, okay, yeah, look, I missed that, or that was really great when that student said that, and now I'm having a conversation with my evaluator. We both had that opportunity. So you can imagine, just from the format, that those kinds of conversations are going to be richer as well. So that's definitely one study, and it's in here. I'll get to it eventually. Okay, I'm just going to give one sentence about this, and happy to talk more about it if you're interested in it. The other thing, and this may or may not be relevant to your context, but there's more than just kind of classroom teachers who are part of evaluation systems. And even for classroom teachers, they have different contexts. So if you're a special education teacher, it actually matters if you're in a resource room. Are you co-teaching? So evaluation systems also need to pay attention to the various roles and contexts that educators are in, and make sure that those systems are customized, and the support is customized for those evaluators as well. Okay, hands-on. Opportunities to practice crucial skills such as data collection and scoring, receive immediate feedback, co-observation with a coach to compare notes and scoring. How many people have that opportunity to pair up their observers to go in, score in the classroom together, and have a conversation afterwards about, what did you see? How close what did you rate this practice? Is that something that you do? Okay, so that's definitely a great opportunity. Double scoring a common set of artifacts, things like that, and modeling a post-observation column, followed by practice and feedback. So again, those kinds of supports, whoever your evaluators are, if they're teachers, if they're principals, if they're other support personnel, even giving them the opportunity to practice coaching. As teachers, we often have time, we would often sit and model practicing parent-teacher conferences and try to get some feedback as well. So it's really important to have that opportunity as well. Okay, so here's something I'm interested in. Your state, district, region, school, how many of you actually do assessment for your evaluators? So you have some kind of test, I guess is the best way to say it, where you can see how well they score looking at teaching practice. So maybe they watch a video, they have to rate it, you have a master scored video, so you know what the practice should be. How many people in here actually do that part? Okay, so a couple of people, right? So two things about it. First of all, it's really important to have some idea about where your knowledge and skills are for your evaluators. For a lot of reasons. One, teachers tend to trust their evaluator if they know that they've been assessed on those really kind of key competencies. Two, to provide support. Where did they struggle? And in the professional learning module, we have like a whole bunch of things about where people struggle like the most. And they struggle on like the instruction part. They struggle on the different levels of instruction. They don't struggle in classroom management. Most evaluators, particularly administrators, can come in and very quickly determine, is this class being run very well? I mean, it's pretty cut and dry stuff. But they struggle on the instruction pieces. It's really hard. And again, it's because it's assessment. It's really hard. Requiring evaluators to demonstrate a minimum level of mastery of core knowledge, including holding difficult conversations, right? So this is another part that's really, really important for evaluators. It's really easy to go in and give the coaching feedback where it's like you did really well. It's really hard to have the conversation with somebody. And this is not just with the teaching profession. There's actually really good research to suggest that appraisals are really difficult for anybody. People don't like to have a difficult conversation. They don't like to say anything bad about another person. Now, watching the political going on now, you might be like, I don't believe that. Seems like people are okay talking about other people. But really in most professions, it's really hard to sit down and say to somebody, hey, you need to improve here, or here's a place where you could grow, right? There's a way to have a conversation that invites reflection, and there's a way to have a conversation that shuts people down. So it's something that, it's a skill, and it's something that people need support on. In a lot of states that actually require evaluators to be certified, this is a really big problem because not everybody can actually pass minimum certification rates to do this work. So I would say if you went back to your state or district or region and actually had a certification test, you would run into the same problem. And then you have to think about what do you do with people who actually can't pass the certification test. So it's a real issue for a lot of people. Okay, continuous, again, calibration. I want to mention one word about this and I'm going to move through this really quickly. One thing we know in the research is that people's skills drift. So let's say you at the beginning of the year, you have a group of evaluators and you do feel confident that their knowledge and skills are where they need to be able to go in and accurately and reliably assess classroom instruction. We know from research that when they come back next year, they will not be as good at it. They just won't, and it just happens. I mean, it's something that unless people practice that continuously, they drift on it. They go back to really bad observation techniques, right? And we have plenty of research to show that, so I'm just going to put that out there, that thinking about evaluation support as ongoing and continuous is really, really important. And again, it's really important if you think evaluation systems are going to help improve instructional quality, right? Because it's hard to improve something that you don't have an accurate measure on. Okay, so we talked a little bit about professional learning snapshot, phase 1. Again, this really gets to like, what do teachers need to know about the evaluation system? They really have to understand what the research base is behind it, what the standards are, and what they're being evaluated on. The different levels, what's the difference between exceptional and average, or whatever your categories are. Phase 2, learning how to apply the observation framework. Explore what practice looks like at each of the levels. Discuss why the practice fits. So again, some ideas about how to do this. Phase 3, this is again for actually once you're in the evaluation system. And we already did that. So what are we trying to achieve here? I'm going to say one thing about rater agreement. Again, really important that your evaluators in your district actually agree on what they're seeing in the classroom. And in the professional learning module, there's lots of things to talk about. How do you get that closer rater agreement? So reliability and agreement are essential because it bridges the credibility gap, helps prepare and certify raters, ensures accurate feedback, monitor system performance, make human resource decisions, and link professional development to evaluation results. So for a lot of reasons, the people that are actually doing the evaluation systems doing the evaluations in your systems need to have a skill set that you feel comfortable in. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about professional learning for feedback and coaching. So this is just a quote here. I won't read it. I'll let you read it for just a second. So if you go in and assess teacher practice, but you never have a conversation about it, right? I mean, it's a critical piece to helping people improve their practice. So a couple of things here. I wanted to talk about some studies that have come out, and we know the power of feedback there. So one is My Teaching Partner. And so basically what this did, in this study, teachers had focused observation instructional feedback twice per month. And what we actually saw in this, and it was continuous feedback, what we actually saw here was improved instructional quality and improved student achievement, which we don't see in a lot of programs. In the Cincinnati study, this was a longitudinal study that found that teacher performance improved mid-career teachers, and it was even more in subsequent years. So again, we have research to suggest that when we have evaluation systems that have frequent, high-quality feedback, we can see improvements in instructional quality and student achievement. Okay, so this we're just going to stop and turn to a partner. When you think about post-observation conferences, so what happens after teachers are observed in your state, district, region? Are your teachers taking an active role in conversations? How are principals preparing teachers to participate and take ownership of the process? So what does the typical post-observation conference look like in your setting? So let's just take a minute, talk to a partner. Okay, so what does high quality feedback look like? And so imagine we were doing this professional learning module and I could put all these videos up here and then we could watch video and talk about it. But we can't, so we're gonna go through these slides like this. But again, high quality feedback, it's timely, it's attentive, it's evidence-based, it uses rubric descriptions and language. I mean, one of the great things about an evaluation system is that you can actually create a common language by which people talk about practice. Again, if it's integrated with your other systems in your district, one thing that educators talk to me about and says it drives them crazy, that a lot of different people come into the classroom and talk about instruction in very different ways. So if they're having an evaluation, the evaluator comes in and talks about practice based on the rubric. Somebody else might be doing a walkthrough and they come and talk to them about what they're seeing using that language. An instructional coach in math or reading might come in and talk about it very different. So I think one thing in terms of we have to do to help educators out is we need to have one way that we talk about educational practice, right, to help them. It's prioritized, it's paced appropriately, it's differentiated for individual teachers' needs, high-level questions, linked to professional growth planning, ends with action strategies, practice, and modelings. Now, when you think about this, is there anything that we're missing up here, actually? Or would you say that this, if you had to like kind of just very generically describe high-quality feedback, would these adjectives capture it? Would you add something?
Time to do it.
Yes. Right. But think about this then, if you're thinking about high quality feedback, then now think about the level of skill that you would need to provide this kind of feedback to a teacher. And we know that this is the kind of feedback that people need to improve, but this is a really high skilled job and we don't really pay enough attention to building up the knowledge and skills of people to do this very well. And we don't give them enough time, right? Okay, so I'm just gonna run through a couple of these. Timely feedbacks. One of the things, and this is again coming out of research, for teachers, the wait between an observation and feedback can be excruciating. This is often what teachers say. They get observed and there's a lot of anxiety between the time that they're observed and their observation conference. Timely feedback, we know, at least from what the research we have now, within 5 days, it helps reduce teacher anxiety. It can lead to richer conversations. Try to remember what you did more than 5 days ago. Boy, I sometimes can't remember what I did in the morning, but I mean, it's really hard and provides teachers with more time and opportunity to apply that feedback, the more immediate it is. Fitting it in, and I think this gets to your time question. Evaluators need support and guidance on fitting post-observation conferences into busy schedules. So provide evaluators with sampling weekly calendars, provide opportunities for principals to share strategies with others, like just giving principals time to talk about how do you even do this work? What's working for you? Make sure the caseload for each evaluator is reasonable enough to allow for timely feedback. What are your caseloads like? For each principal, how many teachers are they evaluating? Just shout out some answers. 30, 25? How much, do you have estimates on how much time they talk about from pre-conference to evaluation to post? How much time does that take up for each teacher? 3 hours each? And that's when they're good at it, by the way. Focused attention, minimize disruption. Teachers talk about all the times when they start a conversation, the principal's in and out. To the extent possible, turn off your phone, email, radio, give the teacher your full attention. Attentive, active listening techniques signal to the teacher that they are being heard and understood. So again, just working with your evaluators, like what does it mean to be active in a conversation? I think we take these things for granted, but again, they require skills and using respectful language. So I like this one, avoiding dominating the conversation. So research has been done time and time again that if you think about it, in a conversation, if it's going to be reflective and constructive, who should be doing the talking? Teachers, right? I mean, we know, one of Charlotte's favorite phrases, the learning is done by the learner. It's the same thing with teachers. If there are learners, the learning has to be very active. But we know in study after study, most of the time, when we've actually looked at this, is dominated by the principals talking to the teacher, telling them what they did or didn't do. Encourage a balanced conversation and ensure that teachers are prepared to participate. Now this is the other part too, because you may have a really good evaluator who knows about having that active conversation and tries to balance it. But teachers also need to be prepared to take ownership in that conversation too. So again, it's about providing the knowledge and skills to both of those people who are participating in the evaluation system. So, and focus on evidence. This reduces 3 big dangers in post-observation conference. So the first is loose interpretation. Evidence-based feedback separates observations and interpretations. Subjectivity. Drawing upon evidence during feedback conversations can decrease subjectivity and emotion. Evidence-based feedback can also remove some of the emotion from the evaluation process. So when we look at the research behind this, the more evidence you can use in a conversation that depersonalize the conversation. So it's not about you per se the teacher, but it's really about what the evidence showed in the actual observation really helps to build that kind of constructive conversation. And again, there are videos that we can actually do activities and we would say, where do you see this in these examples and where don't you? Again, using rubric language and descriptors, incorporating rubric language when discussing helps do these things. Build and reinforce a shared understanding of instruction and ensure that the rubric remains the objective point of the reference in the classroom. So again, this is a skill that people need. How do we talk about instructional practice? How do we build a shared understanding of it? So the teacher focus, equal consideration. So teachers in the conversation should be invited to interpret the evidence as well. They should be able to provide evidence. And remember that teachers need examples and practice for this role in the professional learning you offer to orient them for the evaluation. So they also need to have very concrete and hands-on professional learning in this. Oh, 2 minutes. Okay. You want to give out the last handout? Okay, so I'm going to very quickly go through the end here, pacing and prioritizing feedback. I think one of the things that we're finding in the implementation of evaluation systems, and I guess I'll kind of sum it up like with this as well, is right now many of our evaluation systems and our rubrics, at least in the way they're being used in practice, are often kind of unwieldy. They're really large. And so you can imagine if you're an evaluator and you try to come into the classroom and observe 72 elements of teaching practice. right? It's really, really difficult. And now you try to have a conversation with a teacher, scanning the depth and breadth of your evaluation system. It's also really difficult. So some of the things that other states and districts are trying is really doing this thing about kind of chunking out different parts of it, prioritizing focus. And that's and cycling through those different foci. So that's something to think about too. Again, differentiating for individual teacher needs. One study I wanted to share with you really quick. In Chicago, researchers found that only 10% of questions asked by evaluators were high level and promoted discussion. So it's, we often talk to teachers. One of the things we go in and observe teachers is the kinds of questions that they ask in their classroom of their students. But we see the very, very same kinds of practices that we're asking teachers not to do in post-observation conferences. Questions are very low level, they're yes, no, they don't generate reflection. And so again, as you're thinking about this, it's thinking about how do we support people to do this work better. There's lots of research to show that the more reflective people are about practice, the better that they get at it. So we need to help support evaluators. We need to help support people who are doing the coaching and the feedback to generate reflection as well. So I am going to go to the end. So in front of you, you have the last handout. We're not going to have time to do that here, but it's something for you to take and think about. And this handout is really meant to think about how does your evaluation sit within your larger talent development framework within your school, your district, your state. How is it integrated in that as well? And so the second page of that is the graphic that shows what a at least one representation of what a talent development system would look like. Thinking about how we recruit people into the profession, how do we prepare them, and how do we develop and support and retain them? How is the evaluation system part of that, and how is it integrated with your other systems in your school or district or state that actually support developing educators as well? So closing questions, what questions do you still have about teacher evaluation systems? What can you do to support high quality professional development in your role as an educator? So kind of going forward from here, where do you think, and I think we heard this a little bit at the beginning, and I know I'm down to like 30 seconds, or am I already over time? I'm already over time. Just a couple of questions. Where do you think you need the most support in kind of transforming your evaluation systems to really be about professional growth? I heard before about having resources like videos, time. What else?
One thing that came up in our group was the notion of the rubrics that actually, characterize effective teacher practice. In California, in the induction program, the California Standards for the Teaching Profession have the descriptions of practice, and those could be one way to help use a measure that is more than just you did a great job kind of thing. So resources like that, like the types of rubrics that describe practice that teachers can put themselves on and administrators can.
Okay, so I know the doors are open, my time is over. So thanks for coming. I know this was a kind of a different setup and arrangement, but I do want to, again, put a plug there. I have the website up, contact information. This was just a snippet from a larger professional learning module. We have about 8 on there that cover everything from things like social emotional learning to additional areas around student learning objectives and evaluation. So I urge you to take a look there. And if you can't find what you need, please send me an email and I'm happy to help you there. Thanks for coming and enjoy the rest of your day.